Well, thank you for taking time out of your day to come. Before we start, I need to express some big thanks. One, Luke, Aaron, thank you very much for all of your work with this. Jeff Peterson is also sitting in the back. Jeff is with our crime analysis unit, and he and his staff did a whole bunch of work in preparation for this. So with that, I think all of you know the mayor, but I'll let the mayor say some words and we'll go into the stats stuff.
Thank you, Chief.
You bet.
I just wanted to be here this morning because I just am so pleased to acknowledge the excellent work of LPD, and the results of LPD's work are so critical to making this community a great place for people to call home. And we can all be proud of the work that LPD does every day, and that has done to build this city's reputation as a great place to raise a family. And as you know, public safety is our administration's top priority. It's our residents' top priority. And we are really the envy of other cities when it comes to our crime rates. And when other mayors hear the statistics that you can count the number of homicides in Lincoln on one hand, when they have more than that each day, it's really worth noting just how remarkable these results are. And one of the values of my administration is to utilize data-driven and evidence-based strategies, and we look to LPD as an incredible example of that, putting that value into practice. And you truly are a leader in doing business this way and serving our public this way, and that's one of the big reasons why we're such a safe community. And what I hope that others will deduce from this presentation is that this doesn't happen by accident, that these impressive statistics come from the leadership, performance, and dedication of LPD, and that our officers are people who get up every day, come to work, and in the course of their day's business, may take blows to the ribs, blows to the teeth, or face people running at them with machetes strapped to their wrists. And then they get up the next day and do it all over again. I mean, it's really a profound thing to try and process, but that's what public service looks like at LPD. So recognizing their incredible service, I want to congratulate the police department and all of the excellent leadership provided by each and every officer and by you, Chief Lemeister. I greatly appreciate the work that you do every day and want to extend the gratitude of our entire community for those efforts. You are really creating a successful, secure, and shared future for all of our residents. And I just wanted to say thank you.
Appreciate it. Well said.
All right.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Well, and Mayor, thanks for taking time out of your day and out of your schedule to come over here and provide that support. Well done. We talk all the time in forums like this that the Lincoln Police Department and our staff takes tremendous ownership in the safety and security of the town, as does city government. We are a small component. We're a small partner. Without the partnerships and the willingness of citizens to cooperate with us, we would not be nearly as effective. And then I also need to throw out the partnerships that we have with so many different advocacy groups that we're going to get into later in this presentation. Without those advocacy groups who take over where our skill sets leave off, again, it is that partnership that makes Lincoln so safe and secure. So thank you. And with that, once again, our crime rate, our overall Part 1 crime rate is reduced. And so, Luke, we'll go to, actually, a couple of the main points that we're going to cover here. There was a decline in overall Part 1 crimes, and we'll go into that. We're going to do some comparative modeling with other similar sized communities. We're going to talk about some of the recruitment challenges that we're having, and then we're also going to dive into the technology that allows us to be efficient, because we are a relatively small police force for a city of 287,000 people, and how we use evidence-based approaches and leverage technology along with those partnerships in order to most effectively do the job. Lincoln continues to grow, continues to geographically expand. 28,000 residents in the last decade we've added to our borders, just a little bit larger than Fremont, Nebraska. Fremont, Nebraska has an independent law enforcement agency. They're authorized based upon 2018 statistics to have 36 officers. But I am really happy to say that over that last decade, we have added 32. We've added 32 officers in the last decade. 29 of those have been since 2016. And so through my tenure at the Lincoln Police Department, first with Mayor Beitler and now with Mayor Gaylor Baird, we have that support. And I know in conversations that we're working hard to continue that progress in growing our workforce. So the crime trends, and all of this is in front of you. There was a slight uptick in overall violent crime, and we want to talk about that. But the roughly 9,000 incidents of Part 1 crimes, which is really a gauge of what we do, again, 2.2% decline, and you can see the trend line, the orange line, over the last decade continues to go down. There's many, many explanations of why. Just like we said earlier, only some of it involves the Lincoln Police Department. Most of it is the citizens of Lincoln say, we're not going to tolerate that kind of activity in our neighborhoods. So on the violent crime, we are seeing a continued, and we'll get into the sexual assaults a little bit further. Homicides pretty much static. We had 6 in 2018, 5 in 2019. Aggravated assaults, there's a slight uptick. So what is an aggravated assault? It's the most serious of all assaults, and it's the biggest factor of violent crime. But then we look at shootings with injury, 11. There's 11 shootings with injury in 2019, and each and every one of those victims, their families, nothing about this is meant to diminish it. But for a city of almost 300,000 people, that is a small number. And the mayor touched on it, and we touched on it. Our use and continued look at using technology within the boundaries of the Constitution is a focus. It helps us. It makes us a safer community. And I should have said this before. If you have questions on any one of these slides, we can do it after, do it before. Should we do it after? Is that fair? Okay. Next, a big question that we get all the time. Jeff Peterson, thanks to you and your staff for compiling this data. Well, really, how safe is Lincoln in comparison to other communities of our size? And you can see the 2018 data. So UCR, Uniform Crime Report statistics through the FBI is always a year behind. So we have the 2018 data for violent crime of cities within plus or minus 50,000 of the city of Lincoln, population base. And we are below average. We're definitely below our partners just up Interstate 80. And we continually work to maintain that and improve it where we can. And we, Jeff Peterson and crew, interjected the 2019 data. While it's not an apples-to-apples comparison, it does show that we're still maintaining where we should be. Okay? We talked a lot about Part 1 crime, right? A little over 9,000 incidents in 2019. Violent crime, a little over 1,000 incidents total. But that is a very, very small component of the overall work of the Lincoln Police Department. Burglaries and violent crime, 2%. You know, last year our staff responded to over 121,000 calls for service. And while the things that gain notoriety and attention from all of you are the violent crime, it gains our attention too. We have units that are dedicated to the follow-up of that, but it's such a small part of what the role of a Lincoln police officer is in the city of Lincoln. And Luke did some good work in breaking out some of the other things, and we're going to touch on some of those as we progress through this. You know, one of the bigger things that they think about, 7% of our overall workload is traffic crashes. Traffic crashes were down in 2019 and down statistically significantly, but yet a lot of time and energy, and that's what most citizens in Lincoln are going to experience with the services of the Lincoln police officer, right? They're going to be in a traffic crash, our officers are going to respond, and we're going to provide that particular piece of service. So, we talk a lot about mental health calls for service, and you can see that it dipped last year, a slight dip, but the trend line continues to increase. Another thing that we're proud of is that mental health calls for service range the gamut, from the tragedy of suicide to individuals who are just not able to cope with everyday life. And all points in between, our staff is responding and doing the absolute best that we can. And where our expertise stops, we have some absolutely outstanding partnerships with the Mental Health Association through the REAL program, a data-driven approach, with Centerpoint, with the Bridge, with Bryan Health Systems, with the Crisis Center, and so many others, Families Inspiring Families. We formalize those communication lines, we work with them because we don't want to keep going back to the same residences over and over again and just stabilizing a particular encounter. We want to be part of improving the overall quality of life for the individuals that are part of this and their families. We put in there about EPCs. That's the most extreme. That's where we're removing someone's freedom because they are a threat to themselves or others. If we did not have the services of Bryan Health Systems, of the Bridge, of MHA, that number, I am confident that that number would be significantly higher, and we would have to remove freedoms and place a stress on an already stressed system. Sexual assault reports. Sexual assault reports are one of the 4 components of violent crime, right? Murder, robbery, rape, and aggravated assault. 324, trend line increase. Why? We have to ask ourselves why. Sexual assault is an underreported crime. It has been and will continue to be. But there are some very significant things that are being done nationally and within Lincoln that are impacting these numbers. I can't sit here and tell you that it's a good thing that sexual assault reports are increasing. But they're increasing because societal norms are changing, and no longer is it taboo to not come forward and report a sexual assault. And Voices of Hope, again, Bryan Health Systems, and so many others are helping us in these endeavors. But what we look at is this, Me Too. We've talked about Me Too. And I got some stats here for you. In 2019, 23% of that 324 cases were belated by more than a year. So it was more than a year between when the incident occurred and when this was reported. A snapshot back in 2010 when we investigated 144, 13% of those were belated by more than a year. What does that mean to our officers, to Captain Bucher's staff? There are increased complexities with the investigation of sexual assaults when they are belated. Many of the corroborating pieces of evidence that we utilize are gone. We don't have the physical evidence. We don't have the injuries themselves. Many of the electronic evidence, whether that's video or whether that's cell phone evidence, can't be captured. The DNA from the sexual assault kits doesn't exist. But we still think it's a very good thing that people are coming forward, and we're going to investigate those thoroughly. Why? Because the criminal justice system is one component, one facet of the overall sexual assault process. People that are coming forward, it initiates a process of healing for them as individuals, for them as for their families, and we formalize partnerships all the time to bring to ensure that those services are being provided. I do have to relay, and we've talked about this publicly, Bryan Health making sacrifices financially and with training to train sexual assault nurse examiners and providing them a financial component that allows them to be on call, because those that are experts in this field, those that have advanced training, are going to be able to walk someone who's experiencing something, a tragedy in their life that hopefully they'll never experience again. And it begins that process of healing, whether or not we're ever investigating that crime or not. Okay. Missing person cases. Static, right? Trend line is static. Still 2,369 missing person cases, both adult and juvenile, in 2019. And we took a look at, in 2019, in preparation for this, there's one young lady that was 37 times. She was 37 of those incidents. Another 32 times. A third, 23 times. Can you imagine what someone, a 14, 15, 16-year-old must be going through that's outside of the care of their parents or a guardian, and they're struggling, living on the street, living with friends, surfing from couch to couch, and what that exposes them to? It exposes them to increased vulnerability, the potential for child abuse, the potential that they're not going to gain an education that's going to be part of their success in the future. And we want to do something about this. We want to try to move that trend downwards, despite population growth. And with the mayor's assistance that we talked about earlier this year, in June of this year, we have focused one of our investigators on kids out of care, basically coordinating efforts to address individuals who meet certain thresholds, who we know are vulnerable, possibly being trafficked, and trying to interject ourselves with their families, with these advocate groups, and prevent that cycle. And I know that Captain Bucher has 3 different employees that are very excited about this process, and we can do better, and we're going to do better. Stolen firearms. You know, earlier this year, we had the final recommendations from the Mayor's Task Force on Child Access to Firearms and Safe Storage. There's been a lot of media attention about this, and that's good. That media attention, without a doubt, is driving down those numbers in larceny from autos of firearms in 2018, 2019. So thanks to all of you for that coverage. It makes a difference. We want to sustain that. And sustainability comes in many different facets. There's been public service announcements that have been made in partnership with us, with the Suicide Coalition, with so many other partners here in Lincoln, even those that sell guns. So every one of those people are committed to improving the safety. It is not a good idea, it's bad to keep a firearm in a car, period. It's even worse if we keep that firearm in a car that's not locked or the gun is out in the open. So with that, there has also been some ordinance changes that came about here recently in the fall, where there's been changes. You have to report the theft of a firearm, whether it's from a motor vehicle or whether it's from your home, within 48 hours of first discovering it. We don't want to be punitive to those. We're just trying to encourage a process, because the timely reporting of the theft of firearms helps us find who stole it and recover that firearm before it can be used in a crime of violence. Remember the 11 shootings with injury that we talked about, the homicides that we've experienced. And the second is an ordinance that says if you are going to keep your gun in your car, which is a bad idea, it can't be out in plain view, and your car has to be locked. Keep sending that message, the most important of which is don't leave it there, But if it is, make a timely report, and it'll be part of what we're doing to try to keep that trend moving down. And I know that the mayor's office is committed to that. I know that the Suicide Prevention Coalition is prevented to that. The Lancaster County Sheriff's Office, all of which have been outstanding partners. And all of those that took their time with Captain Stilley on that task force to make those recommendations. So thank you to the citizens that brought that conversation forward and continue to move it along. Okay, response times. Response times, we changed. This is one of our benchmark indicators, right? We're a data-driven city, data-driven approach. Response times, from the time someone calls 911 to the time an officer arrives, in certain call types, we call them priority 1s and 2s. What does that mean? That means crimes in progress. Crimes or accidents where the presence of an officer will stabilize the situation and either arrest the persons responsible or prevent further injury. So we watch this closely. AC Jackson, all the team captains, many of which are present here today, they are reviewing this all the time, along with our dispatch, with our communications center. And you see an increase. 84% of the time on priority 1s and 2 calls in 2019, we arrived in 10 minutes or less. That's good. Good. Because remember we talked about the continuing expanse of our boundaries? We ask ourselves, well, what moves this? What makes that impact? And that kind of like what makes crime is, it's hard to answer. I truly believe that one of the things that has impacted this is Captain Morrow, who's here today, had led a group of citizens and internal staff in 2018 on a boundary review. And we redid the boundaries within our geographic teams. One of the things that we're trying to look at is this. Something else that we're going to continue to watch, and at least the preliminary data that AC Jackson and I discussed, is that the Southeast team at 6601 Pine Lake, that was one of the areas where our response times were suffering. Now that Pine Lake Road to the west and to the east is open, we are really hopeful that that is going to continue to improve response times for the Southeast team. Again, we don't want our officers sitting in the substations, but they do have to go there to do reports, tag in property, have conversations with their supervision teams. So they're not always going to be responding from a geographic locale. They're moving, they're in their cars. But yet some time is spent at these team stations, and we're going to keep trying to move that needle. There are other initiatives that we're going to be looking at during the next biennium that could potentially improve these things too. And the Northwest Geographic Team, which is separated, right? Air Park is part of the Northwest team. The 27th Street corridor is near I-80 is a high volume call for service location. And we believe in the future that a standalone Northwest team is something that we're going to look at and improve. That's not going to happen now or in the next biennium, but we're planning for that process today. So, trends in video evidence. This is an incredible number when you really look at it. These are not all of the video analysis that we do. It's not all of it. These are the ones that are formalized that get to our video forensics unit. 1,769 cases in 2019, 401 in 2010. Now, what's driving this one is that it's the proliferation of video surveillance systems in businesses, in homes, on streets, everywhere, right? And that cooperation is expected in every single case that we do, whether it's a homicide or a vandalism. And it is a powerful deterrent to crime and one that we can use to corroborate when things happen. So what did we do to address this trend line? And that's something I have to go back with the sexual assaults. In 2019, in fact in February of 2019, we reclassified an existing position within our records unit because it was an open position, and we created a second analyst spot. So it's not a new full-time employee. We reclassified it, and Becky Keller began to help Jared Maneri, because before that, from 2010 through 2018, one person doing that work. Now we have two, and as part of our evidence-based approaches, we know that cases that are submitted to Crime Stoppers have a clearance rate above what our norms are. And we're going to continue to look at that and see how much of an impact this new employee makes. 341% in a decade. It's a lot. Another one, forensics exams. This is a thing that's very close to my heart. There's been an existing electronic evidence unit, a collaboration between the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office and the Lincoln Police Department for more than a decade. But cell phones, the most important change in public safety. We are safer today, every one of us, because we have a cell phone. And we have people within this community that are willing to use that cell phone to call 911 when there's an emergency or somebody needs help, or they're trusting their instincts and they're calling us, and we go out and investigate things with the goal of prevention. Another expectation that's been created is that in every single case, once again, from the gamut, we are expected to analyze these phones. These numbers are exclusively Lincoln Police Department employees who are downloading cell phones as part of a criminal investigation. You can see that growth. We recognize that growth. Once again, we want to use data. We reclassified another existing civilian employee in 2019. In fact, in September of 2019, we hired a civilian analyst away from a public sector employer where there's much of that same kind of thing that is occurring. And she is assisting right now on those violent crime cases. Captain Booker, his staff are utilizing Don Frazee to assist in the deep dive with the volumes of information that exists in every one of our cell phones. Once again, done within the boundaries of the Constitution, either by consent or with legal process. And that number is going to continue to grow. Committed time. And this is where Luke comes in. So committed time. That is one of the many matrices that we look at to say, how many officers should the Lincoln Police Department have? And it is based upon evidence base that exists right here. This is the evidence base. If any of you care to read the 25 to 30 pages, we can get you a copy of that or a link to it. But it's really called the Rule of 60. And there's multiple facets to the Rule of 60. How much of your commissioned force is dedicated to patrol, uniform patrol? They say 60%. A.C. Jackson and I, and Brian, you're right behind there, right? Yeah. We did the math this morning, and we're at about 66%. So we're meeting that threshold. Then they talk about when your committed time, so when the demands of the community, when they're picking up the phone and calling for 121,000 calls for service, and the reports and the time off and the follow-up, all those things are calculated into this algorithm that we'd be happy to share. When it raises above 60%, that's when that's the tipping point. And not to steal a term from a well-known author, but we're at a tipping point. And we've seen the steady increase. It's 1 year, and we'll continue to analyze it. Again, one component of how many officers we need to staff the Lincoln Police Department. We'll look at officers per 1,000, right? We're at 1.22 officers per 1,000 today, 353 authorized. Remember again, we've grown our policing agency by 32 full-time employees over the last decade, 29 of those since 2016, and that is a direct result of the support of the council, mayor when you're on the council, and also during your first few months. I can't remember exactly when we announced that, but it was within a few months of when that occurred. We appreciate that. We'll continue to watch these. If you have more questions about the algorithms, Luke would be happy to explain that to you. Almost done here. Committed time. It's hard to understand. Well, shouldn't 100% of an officer's committed time be dedicated to the demands of the community? And when I'm talking about demands, I'm talking about they're picking up the phone, they're calling non-emergency, they're calling 911, we're responding, and all of the paperwork and follow-up that goes into that. The uncommitted time is something that continues to grow, and that's what separates the Lincoln Police Department from others, in my opinion, and also which is a big, immeasurable component of why Lincoln is safe. Because from our command staff, to our officers, to our civilian staff, they are spending time in the community building relationships in advance of tragedy. I can tell you that a majority of my time is spent doing that, internally and externally, and it should be, right? That's one of the best parts of this job, hands down. But when we have too much of the officer's time that is meeting the demands and not enough building rapport, building trust, which way is it going to go? Lincoln Police Department in 2012 to 2013, we took on the leadership of the Communications Center, a demanding part of public safety. It makes sense, right? More than 90% of the incoming calls to the Communications Center are Lincoln Police Department. It results in action by the Lincoln Police Department. Almost 500,000 incoming calls for a staff of just over 60. Just under 60. Just under 60. Thanks, Brian. It's static, and there's things that are moving this needle, right? Uplink, we think helps because citizens are taking the time and some of those calls are not being directed to the communication center. That's good. But again, we have to look at those particular demands. And I want to thank the staff of the communication center. When you sit down and you take calls from people who are experiencing the most tragic time of their life, and then you're trying to summarize that information in an expeditious fashion to get an officer to respond, that is not easy. And yet they do it every single day. They do it for us, they do it for the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office, they do it for Lincoln Fire and Rescue, and many of the rural units, and a little bit for the University of Nebraska Police Department. A great collaboration, minimizes duplicity in government service. What moved this? This is when we moved the service desk to the Lincoln Police Department service desk, so many non-emergency functions to the comm center, and that's why that is combined. So, a couple more. Quality assurance audits. The mayor just talked about yesterday, where we're sending out a survey to kind of gauge where the citizens are at, what is important to them, what do they think about the services that are being provided. We have been doing something similar since 1993, very focused on officers who, so what are these numbers? Let me back up. We use our new recruits and interns and volunteers to poll over 4,000 people last year, and we asked them very specific questions. But who are we calling? How are we getting that information, right? We're calling people that our officers have given a citation to. We're calling people that have been victims of crime, and we're calling people that have been involved in traffic collisions. Not everybody responds. I think Luke told me this morning it's about a 12% response rate. But yet, we're asking the questions, how safe and secure do you feel? How do you feel in your neighborhood? And look at that, it continues an upward trend. And again, then we ask a specific question, the percent of those surveyed, how was the service provided by the officer that you encountered? And that trend line continues to move up. In fact, 76% last year. That is impressive because when you look at national data, one would think that crime rates continue to go down nationally, which they do for the most part. There's certain parts of violent crime that are ticking up. And then what is the perception of policing? Nationally, perception of policing is somewhat moving down. Here, it's the other direction. We are not perfect. Do not hear me say that. That's not what I'm saying. There is always room for improvement, but overall, the men and women of our staff do outstanding work, and I'm incredibly proud of them. Recruitment and hiring. Another thing that there's so many factors that goes into a great economy, low unemployment here for quite a period of time. Some national events that may be driving things down, an unwillingness of some to work third shift with Tuesday, Wednesday off, which our officers do. And you can see that the number of applicants hired, the orange bars continue to raise. Why? Because we're getting the support of adding new FTEs and replacing those that are retiring or moving on. But the number of applicants, that dive is a concern and something that we have partnered with Doane College on to study in depth. Why do we study it? Because we try to improve it, right? And we need to stop that trend. And there are things that we are doing to focus those efforts, but without the community's assistance, without people saying, you know what, you have a service mindset and you're willing to sacrifice your time, come work for the Lincoln Police Department, that's what we need. And all of you help us with that. I know you do. And we're going to continue to look at it. But it is a concerning trend, and one that is not isolated to the Lincoln Police Department or even to public sector employers. So, a lot of information in there. There is additional information that we're providing as handouts, and I'll answer any questions that I can, and we have a great group of people here that might have other things to interject.
Did you want to talk about the redistribution for the extra investigator position? You commented you were going to come back to that.
Oh, yes. On missing persons?
You commented about it being...
That's right, sexual assault. So the sexual assault trend line, what are we doing to address that? We currently are exploring a grant application with the Family Violence Council to hire a full-time investigator and a support victim advocate. We're hopeful that that grant application will be successful because we need to provide personnel to most appropriately address that trend line. Again, we are constantly looking at different kinds of call types and where our resources should be sent or placed. So, thank you. Any other questions?
Just staying on that, on the sex assault area for a minute. I know that rape kits was somewhat of an issue. Is there any update about touching up on scenario?
Absolutely, Lori. Let me get to those particular stats. Thank you for asking. It was not a planted question by any means. So in 2019, and I'm glad Marty is still here. Marty Farringer, captain with the Northeast team, was very involved in this process when he served as the commanding officer for the Criminal Division 2. He brings forward research, best practices guidelines from the National Institute of Justice. So then we work with leadership from the Voices of Hope, leadership from the Child Advocacy Center, leadership from Bryan Health, and saying, how can we address sexual assault kits, right? And what I'm happy to say is that since that process has occurred, we have reviewed 381 legacy cases. And out of that review, we have sent an additional 105 cases to the lab for review. So far, 40 have been returned, and of those 40, there is additional investigation that is occurring with 3. It's really, really important for me to talk about that there was not, if the sexual assault kit existed and it had corroborative value within the investigation itself, it was sent. But it does not hurt us to do a thorough review. And many of the cases that we're talking about revolve around the issue of consent. So once again, it's not an issue of whether or not that there was sexual intercourse, because both parties involved said that there were. It is a process of whether or not it was consensual or not. But guidelines that exist with the NIJ, partnerships with the Nebraska State Lab, we are continuing to work through those. There have been no arrests made as a result of those reviews or those submissions to date.
And have they slowed down any of the current reports that are being made? I mean, you know what I mean?
I don't.
So if a new case came in, is it further down the line because these old cases are being tested?
Oh,
or?
nope.
Okay.
The turnaround time, I don't think that has been affected. In fact, that's part of, they added an analyst and capacity. So, good question though. Got you. William.
Looking at the recruitment and hiring statistics or the graph from 2011 to 2012, there was a drastic drop. What is that?
I'm going to ask A.C. Jackson, who is in his current role, to address that.
We only had one class in 2012. All the other years we had 2 classes, we had 2 recruiting cycles. So in 2012 we just had 1, so we would basically have the numbers.
Yeah, if we were doing a similar side-by-side comparison, we would have effectively had just to double that, but we wanted to provide you with accurate statistics. So, good question. Anybody else?
When you mentioned the 11 people shot with injury, can you tell me how that compared with previous years, or
Yeah.
is that part of the aggravated assault number?
Yes, it is. So those 11, Lori, do not include the homicides, because we're keeping those separate because there were homicides in 2019 that were the result of a shooting. In 2018, there were 8 incidents of shootings with injuries, not homicides. So it's a very, very small data set, but pretty consistent. And when we're doing these, because we look at these all the time, right? We should. We parse out other numbers, such as accidental shootings that cause injury, and our staff has to work through those. That's not included in there. Suicides with a firearm are not included in there. These are merely the ones that would be classified as an aggravated assault, not a homicide. Good clarification. Anybody else? Yep.
Back on the recruitment numbers for a little bit, when you talk about how police are viewed nationally, how does the Lincoln Police Department sort of fight back against the stereotype of police that persists in the media and elsewhere that is probably or might be affecting these application numbers, especially among minorities?
Absolutely. Great question. And here is, so it's a subcomponent of that committed time conversation that we're having. If our officers don't have the time to sit down with the citizens that they serve, in particular, underrepresented citizens, because that's what we're talking about, they don't get an opportunity to know each other. They don't understand where you come from, what you're all about, what your family is. And that's what happens in all of these different public engagement events that we're having, both formally and informally, right? Over 1 million times, especially when you count in the dispatch calls for service, we are in contact with the citizens of Lincoln on an annual basis. Every single one of those is an opportunity to build trust and rapport. Most of the time they do, sometimes they don't. How do we also resist that? I mean, that's why I look at those QSA numbers. In particular, how is an officer doing? We're not perfect, and we can improve. We absolutely can improve, but that is a multifaceted approach that we continue to look at, from how we recruit people and where we recruit them throughout their entire career, and all of the training and quality assurance measures in between. And we talk a lot about implicit bias. We train on implicit bias. Implicit bias is real, and it exists within every single one of us. But how do we break down those barriers? We get to know each other, we get to understand each other, and work in collaboration. Also, I have to throw this out to all of you. All of you help us with that, because you hold us accountable, and you should, and we want to be as transparent as possible. Maybe we're not as transparent as some always want us to be, but we try. But you also cover good work by the men and women of this agency. And you do it all the time. All the time. So thank you for that. Good question. Command staff, anybody want to add anything? Luke, Aaron? Okay, lots and lots of different data in here. If you have clarifying questions, Luke, Aaron, please contact them, and we will work to get you that information. Thanks for taking the time this morning.